This article was released by NBC News, written by Bridget Bowman, and published on April 30th at 8:54 a.m. Maine Governor Janet Mills announced Thursday that she is suspending her campaign for the Senate, citing a lack of financial resources and clearing the way for military veteran and oyster farmer Graham Plattner in the Democratic primary ahead of a general election against GOP Senator Susan Collins. Quote, "While I have the drive and passion, commitment and experience, and above all else, the fight to continue on, I very simply do not have the one thing that political campaigns unfortunately require today, the financial resources," Mills said in a statement. "That is why today I have made the incredibly difficult decision to suspend my campaign for the United States Senate," she said. Senate Democrats had touted Mills as a top recruit to take on Collins, who is the only Republican senator representing a state that President Donald Trump lost last year. Maine is practically a must-win if Democrats are to net the 4 seats they need to take control of the chamber in the 2026 midterm election. But Collins has proven a tough opponent in previous elections. After launching her Senate campaign in October, Mills struggled to gain traction against Plattner, who burst onto the scene as a brash political newcomer and quickly built a loyal following. Plattner notched endorsements from high-level progressive leaders, including Senator Bernie Sanders, an independent from Vermont, and Senator Elizabeth Warren, a Democrat from Massachusetts. Most importantly, he built major support among Maine Democrats, leading by double digits in recent polls of the primary. Plattner's rise and the governor's struggles came despite top Democrats' preference for Mills, turning this campaign into a rare rebuke of party leaders in a top-tier race. Hold on, there's a little news story here. Mills was backed by the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee and Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, a Democrat from New York, who viewed her as the party's best general election candidate. We have a little news story here that I will play aloud.
In all likelihood, any chance the Democratic Party has to win control of the Senate in November goes right through the state of Maine and requires unseating Republican Senator Susan Collins. But first, Democrats have to pick a candidate in a primary that is putting the party's thorniest debates about ideological issues and generational change on full display. Maine's Democratic governor, Janet Mills, is 78 years old, or 78 years young, depending on your point of view, and is seen as the establishment figure as she faces off against 41-year-old progressive political newcomer, Graham Plattner. Now, polls show Plattner is leading by a significant double-digit margin, less than 2 months from primary day. But Mills told my colleague Sahil Kapoor she doesn't put much stock in those polls and dismissed concerns over her age.
I do what I always do, and that is going out and talking to people, one-on-one, small groups, getting to know what's on people's minds.
Got it.
Small businesses, because people already know who I am, pretty much. They've already voted for me at least once, or had that choice anyway. I've done things. I've gotten stuff done for people in Maine.
One other voter in Maine, Jennifer, she's 61. She's a moderate from Holden. She told us she was leaning toward Mills. She doesn't love Plattner, doesn't trust him completely, but she says we've got to change, and he's younger and he's new. She worries 78 is too old. What do you say to her?
I say this. Plattner is the same age as J.D. Vance. He's 41. Does she like J.D. Vance? Just because of age? No, it's not all about age. Age isn't the issue. I have experience. I have know-how. I can go there on day one and get things done.
Meanwhile, Plattner, who campaigned alongside Senator Elizabeth Warren on Saturday, offered his take on why he's leading in these polls and why he believes he could be the best choice to take on Senator Susan Collins, despite controversies over his past statements on sexual assault and a tattoo he covered up, which resembled a symbol associated with Nazis.
I think there's just a exhaustion with this kind of politics now in the electorate. I think that's why the negative ads that the governor's campaign came out against us backfired spectacularly. Our support has gone up. And so I think people are sick and tired of this negative performative politics, a politics that is not remotely built around discussing policy. We are playing an entirely separate game. We are doing a campaign that is entirely different, being far more organizing focused, really focusing on going out into communities and connecting with Mainers directly.
Sahel also spoke to both candidates about a recent NBC News focus group that asked Democratic voters in Maine and also in Michigan their feelings on the party.
I want to mention to you some words that some focus groups of Democrats we talked to in Michigan and Maine used about the Democratic Party. Weak, spineless, floundering, ineffective, distracted. Does that sound about right to you?
I think I might use all of those words to describe the Democratic Party on a daily basis. So, yeah, that sounds right to me.
Do they have a point?
Distracted, wow. They probably do. I mean, I'm not happy with everything going on in Washington, not at all. But we need to level the playing field. I think the Democrats have to take back the Senate. And that's one good reason I'm running, because I think the control of the United States Senate does go through Maine, and I want to make sure we capture it.
And joining me now, fresh off this reporting trip to Maine, is NBC senior national political reporter Sahil Kapoor. Great work, great to get both candidates and also you talk to voters to get a sense of what they are thinking. When they talk about the qualities they're looking for, what stands out?
Yeah, Kelly, one of the first things you learn going to Maine is what an institution Susan Collins is. She's coming up on 30 years in the Senate. It was very common for me to walk into rooms full of Democratic voters and meet at least somebody who had supported her in the past. So that's what Democrats are up against. The second thing I noticed among Democrats, at least, is this jarring disconnect between party leadership here in Washington and the sentiments on the ground. Party leadership here, including Senator Chuck Schumer, are supporting Mills. They see her as safe, tested, most likely to beat Susan Collins. On the ground, the feeling is very different. They're ready for something different. They've lost their trust in party leadership, and they want younger, more populist candidates. Take a listen to voters I spoke to.
I have issues with Graham Plattner's past, and I don't know if zebras can change their stripes, but I'm curious, and I'm for anyone who can defeat Susan Collins.
Janet Mills is the one who has the grit, the experience, the intellect to go up against Susan Collins and finally get her out of the Senate.
I think she's done a great job as governor, but I'm excited to have someone else with new ideas and who's really willing to fight for Maine people.
I think she's a good person. I think she's a good politician, but she's 77. I think it's time for some new blood.
Do you feel pretty confident that Graham Plattner can win a general election?
Yes, I do.
I'm very struck by spending time in Maine where they're not attacking these folks. They're deciding different qualities, but they're not saying, I really don't like this one, I really don't like that one. They're looking for something else. That stands out.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that Graham Plattner is going to have to do if he's going to become a senator is win over a lot of voters who've supported Janet Mills at one point and who have supported Susan Collins at another point. And part of the thing you just heard there from voters is they not only, some of them like Graham Plattner, but some of them don't like him but are willing to support him because they think he's more electable than Janet Mills. Again, a yawning gap between them and what party leadership here thinks.
Defining what's electable can really be troublesome for people. Now, he is also an Iraq War veteran. That he brings that to the conversation. I want to play part of your conversation where you talked about how important that is, and then we can talk about it a little further.
The thing that it has done for me emotionally is that it's just really sad and frustrating to watch a system and people in power essentially just do the same thing that took me to war in Iraq, but without any of the attempts to trick anybody. Like, they just understand that they can do it. Pete Hegseth wants to drop bombs on people. And so they just go drop bombs on people. They're not even trying to justify it.
You've talked about reimagining power and thinking and rethinking the way Democrats exercise it in Washington. Is there anything you think they could be doing now that they're not, given that they're not in the majority and able to corral enough votes to stop this war in particular?
Yeah, organize an anti-war movement. To get people out into the streets and effectively oppose a war, that requires organization, requires resources, and it requires people to go on TV and talk about doing it. I don't see any of that happening. I mean, this kind of goes to one of my core critiques of the Democratic Party. It has forgotten that power derives from more than just the institutions. It derives from more than just the structures that they're used to working in. Power can be secondary, outside the institutions, coming from things like movements, coming from things like organizing people. The Democratic Party has done, from what I can tell, absolutely nothing on that front.
So what do you look for next? Your last takeaways here.
Yeah, so voters are very angry about the war in Maine. They're not just opposed to it. There's a raw anger there. They don't understand why we're there. They've noticed that prices are going up. They want the money to be spent at home. And, so much of politics is timing. Graham Plattner is using this moment. He's gotten a little bit from his personal experience. He can speak about this in a way that nobody else can, and he's taking full advantage of that to talk about his own experience. And also, Janet Mills, the governor, has sharpened her attacks on the Iran war, making a constitutional case against it, a moral case against it, and an economic case against it. Finally, Kelly, Susan Collins has so far voted in favor of continuing this war, allowing Trump to prosecute it. But she said in a statement to NBC News she may turn against it after the 60-day mark. Clearly, she, too, is in touch with the sentiments on the ground.
Great window into an important race. Thank you, Sahil. We really appreciate it.
Life is but a dream. Mom?
All right. That ad. Mills was backed by the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee and Senate Minority Leader Chuck I said that already. Schumer and the DSCC Chair Kirsten Gillibrand, a Democrat from New York, did not reference Plattner in a joint statement on Mills' departure from the race. Quote, "Our North Star is winning a Democratic Senate majority, and over the past year, Senate Democrats have carved out multiple paths to do that," they said. "We've recruited strong candidates who have expanded the map, a winning message focused on fighting for hardworking families, and formidable campaigns working every day to hold Republicans accountable. In 2026, Democrats will win a Senate majority," end quote. Mills, 78, sought to quell concerns about her age by pledging to only serve one term in the Senate, but some Democratic voters were still concerned about her age and viewed Plattner as the candidate with the best chance of beating Collins, who is 73. Despite a slew of controversial social media posts, from his past that generated headlines in recent months, Mills had argued those posts would make Plattner vulnerable to GOP attacks in November. Plattner was a prolific commenter on Reddit, making statements downplaying sexual assault, criticizing police and rural Americans. An Army and Marine veteran, Plattner attributed the posts to his struggles and post-traumatic stress after serving in Iraq and Afghanistan. He said the controversy strengthened his campaign. Mills highlighted Plattner's comments downplaying sexual assault in her first ads attacking him, and her allies suggesting the comments would turn off female voters, who have been key in Collins' coalition. But Mills' campaign largely stopped airing TV ads at the end of March, according to Ad Impact, in one potential outward sign of the struggle with resources. Plattner continued to blanket the airwaves and recently began to train his attention on Collins, suggesting he was pivoting to the general election. Republicans have already begun to attack Plattner as he pulled ahead in the primary. The GOP Super PAC Pine Tree Results PAC launched an ad Monday highlighting those controversial social media posts and Plattner having a tattoo that resembled a Nazi symbol. Plattner has said he was not aware of the Nazi connection and has since covered up the tattoo. National Republican Senatorial Committee Chair Tim Scott, a Republican from South Carolina, said in a statement that Chuck Schumer and Senate Democrats just coordinated a phony who is too extreme for Maine. Susan Collins has always put in the work for her constituents and delivered. Washington Democrats always fall short in Maine and will again because they just nominated a dishonest radical. In a statement later Thursday morning, Plattner said that Janet Mills has dedicated her career to this beautiful state. We are all eternally grateful for her service. We both got into this race because we know how critical defeating Susan Collins is, and her decision today reflects that commitment. I look forward to working with her between now and November to do just that. In a recent interview in Maine, just before she dropped out of the primary, NBC News asked Mill if she would endorse Plattner in the general election if he won the Democratic nomination. Quote, "I've always been a Democrat," Mills said. "I've always supported the Democratic candidate." Speaking to reporters at the U.S. Capitol, Collins said that, quote, "I'm sure this was a very difficult decision for Governor Mills, and I wish her well. She has devoted her life to public service in the state of Maine in many different capacities. She has served the people of our state, and I'm sure this was a hard decision for her." Asked if she thought Plattner would be an easier opponent, Collins said, quote, "I'm not going to get into the November election at this point." This article was written by Bridget Bowman. I wonder if there's other credits at the end. Lizzie Jensen and Sahil Kapoor contributed. This next article was published by CNN Politics, written by Tierney Sneed and Frederica Schouten. The Supreme Court it was also published, I forgot to say that, it was updated 18 hours ago, so today's the 30th of April. It was released the 30th of April. The Supreme Court on Wednesday kicked yet another leg out from under the Voting Rights Act, the landmark 1965 civil rights law that Chief Justice John Roberts' court has repeatedly undermined over the years. Wednesday's opinion, written by Justice Samuel Alito, with the dissent from the three court's liberals, will make it much harder for voters of color to challenge redistricting plans that allegedly dilute the political power of minority communities. The ruling will bring about major changes to political representation at all levels of government in future elections, starting in earnest in 2028. Many states will either choose to make changes to legislative boundaries or be forced by courts to redraw districts that currently guarantee the ability of minority voters to elect the candidate of their choice. And here's the voting breakdown of who was for and against. State legislatures controlled by Republicans could opt to eliminate a slew of Democrat-held seats, particularly across the South, in an effort to cement the GOP's hold on the U.S. House. However, the decision's impact on the 2026 midterm elections could be limited, given the practical and legal hurdles to redrawing legislative plans at this point in the electoral cycle. In the case, which examined Louisiana's congressional plan, the Supreme Court ruled that a map that had created a second majority-minority district in the state because of a voting rights challenge amounted to an unconstitutional use of race. The opinion had the effect of drastically changing the legal test the Supreme Court put forward 40 years ago for how courts should approach Voting Rights Act redistricting cases. Alito played down how much he was reworking that test, but in a dissent joined by the court's two other Democratic appointees, Justice Elena Kagan said, quote, "The court's decision will set back the foundational right Congress granted of racial equality in electoral opportunity. Here's what to know about the historic ruling and what happens next." Wednesday's decision lands in an electoral season that already is underway, but it could set off an effort in several states to create new maps ahead of November's midterm elections for Congress. Republicans appear likely to benefit from the initial scramble. Louisiana, the state at the center of the case, saw the High Court strike down a map that created a black majority district now held by Democratic Representative Cleo Fields. The Supreme Court rejected the map used in 2024 as an unconstitutional gerrymander ahead of the 2026 election. And then these maps show the old map with the redrawn map and the new rejected map. Group that represents the majority in each. Here are those maps broken down by race. Republican officials who control state government in Louisiana have not yet indicated how they will respond, but in a statement Wednesday, State Attorney General Liz Murrill said she would work with the state's legislature and Governor Jeff Landry on how to proceed with a constitutionally compliant map moving forward. In a statement, Landry did not address whether the state would move to redraw lines. Any redistricting action in Louisiana would disrupt the state's May 16th primary. Early voting is slated to start Saturday, and overseas and military ballots have already gone out. Fields and other Democrats argued it already is too late to draw new lines. Alito's opinion for the conservative majority returns the case to the lower court for more proceedings, but without any instructions about whether the map should be withdrawn for the midterms. His opinion also did not mention a legal doctrine known as Purcell, which says courts should avoid issuing rulings that would cause chaos and confusion for voters as an election is happening. Adam Kincaid, the president and executive director of the National Republican Redistricting Trust, notes that Purcell is a limitation on last-minute court action and should not constrain state lawmakers from moving forward. That's stupid. I think Louisiana very likely could do it, he told CNN. We'll see if they do. Other states that have not kicked off voting in their primaries could also move quickly to draw lines. That includes Tennessee, which holds its primary August 6th. U.S. Senator Marsha Blackburn on Wednesday argued state lawmakers to draw another Republican seat in response to the court's decision. That move would likely target the state's sole Democrat in the House, Representative Steve Cohen, who represents Memphis. In Florida, state lawmakers on Wednesday approved new congressional boundaries devised by GOP Governor Ron DeSantis that aims to help Republicans secure 24 of the state's 28 U.S. House seats this fall. The High Court's ruling likely will strengthen DeSantis' hand in defending that map against expected court challenges. Below is the proposed Florida map that could give Republicans 4 more seats, a map unveiled by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis' office and approved by the state legislature. And it shows Republicans hoping to gain 4 additional seats in the House, reducing Democrats' representation from 8 to just 4 representatives for the state of Florida. As you can see, the map would shrink districts which previously included majority blue voters, absorbing them into red districts, effectively gerrymandering out votes, and keeping them limited to Miami, West Palm Beach, and Orlando. I mean, this was obscenely illegal 30 years ago, by the way. Anyways, his legal team had cited the looming voting rights decision as one of its justifications for moving forward with mid-decade redistricting. And the High Court's ruling was quickly distributed electronically to members of the state Senate Wednesday as they prepared to vote on the boundaries. The Supreme Court's ruling essentially means evidence of a discriminatory motive may be necessary to win Voting Rights Act-based challenges. The decision cuts against 40 years of understanding that Congress wrote the VRA provision in question to push back not just on intentional racial discrimination, but on redistricting plans that had the effect of discrimination, even if intentional discrimination couldn't be proven. Alito wrote that VRA plaintiffs could only succeed, quote, when the circumstances give rise to a strong interference that intentional discrimination occurred. He claimed Wednesday that the court was stopped short of requiring a, quote, finding of intentional discrimination, but he significantly narrowed the kinds of evidence plaintiffs can use to prove their cases, requiring a focus on current conditions. Altogether, the ruling will make VRA redistricting cases, quote, all but impossible to win, said Omar Nooraldin, Senior Vice President of the Policy and Litigation Department of the voting rights group Common Cause. Lawmakers don't just say out loud that they're redrawing maps for the purpose of diluting the political power of communities of color. Nooraldin said. The legislative privileges often... I got it right. I was excited. Sorry. And legislative privileges often prevent plaintiffs from getting discovery that would show what map drawers' private intentions were. Intentional discrimination cases are, quote, much rarer than they used to be, said Jason Torchinsky, an elections lawyer who has represented Republicans in redistricting fights, told CNN. Quote, you need some sort of smoking gun evidence, said Torchinsky, who had represented Louisiana in the lower court proceedings in the current case. You need an email where someone says, yeah, I carved up the Hispanic neighborhood, and people just don't do that. The new ruling elevates the role partisan gerrymandering can play in warding off Voting Rights Act claims, coming on the heels of a 2019 Supreme Court ruling that said federal courts can play no role in policing partisan gerrymandering. Alito's new opinion and a racial gerrymandering redistricting case the court handed down in 2024 suggests that minority voters can only succeed in Voting Rights Act cases if they can propose maps that would protect whatever partisan advantage a legislature was seeking with its plan. Alito said that to prevail in a Voting Rights Act case, plaintiffs will first have to show that it would be possible to draw the majority-minority district in a map that met all the other goals a legislature would have in drawing a plan, including a legislature's goal of boosting one party over another. Secondly, Alito said plaintiffs must show a minority group's votes in a block in ways that are distinct from party affiliation. In a two-party system, quote, racial divides often mirror the partisan divide, said Hillary Harris Klein, a senior counsel for voting rights at the Southern Coalition for Social Injustice. Quote, when these partisan objectives really amount to silencing black and brown communities, the result is the same, she said, accusing the Supreme Court of, quote, allowing states to whitewash the dilution of minority voting strength. In Wednesday's decision, the Supreme Court essentially adopted arguments made by Alabama in a separate redistricting case decided 3 years ago, arguments that two court conservatives rejected then, but are siding with now. Roberts, who wrote the 2023 opinion, and Allen v. Milligan, upholding a longstanding interpretation of the Voting Rights Act, didn't write a concurrence in Wednesday's Louisiana case to explain why he completely changed his views, or how he squared the new redistricting ruling with the last one. Neither did Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who joined Roberts and the three liberals in the Alabama case. Roberts, in 2023, upheld a legal test known as Gingles that the Supreme Court laid out for the VRA redistricting cases in 1986. It said that for voters to prevail in their challenge to redistricting plans, they must show that, quote, the minority group must be sufficiently large and geographically compact to constitute a majority in a reasonably configured district, that the minority group is cohesive in its political views, and that white voters can vote as a bloc to defeat the minority group's preferred candidate. Now, in the Alito opinion in the Louisiana case that Roberts has signed on to, The bar plaintiffs must meet the VRA cases in Now, in the Alito opinion in the Louisiana case that Roberts has signed onto, the bar plaintiffs must meet in VRA cases is much higher. While practical and legal obstacles will limit the effects of the ruling for 2026, it will likely render major changes for the legislative maps used in 2028 and will be extremely influential in the redistricting drawn after the 2030 census. Republican-controlled states will be inclined to take a look at their current maps and consider redrafting any majority-minority districts they were forced to draw under the Voting Rights Act. Southern states like Georgia and South Carolina could see new maps before 2028, as Ohio and states where tribal populations had forced the creation of VRA districts. In Georgia, Republican gubernatorial candidate Rick Jackson on Wednesday called on state lawmakers to add redistricting to an expected special session. The state's primary election is fast approaching on May 19th. Democratic states that were inclined to preserve their current plans may nonetheless face lawsuits arguing those plans violate Wednesday's opinion in how race was used to draft them. Illinois could be vulnerable to a lawsuit like that, says Torchinsky. California's plan may face legal challenge too. However, the way Wednesday's ruling protects plans drawn for partisan reasons could protect it, as the goal of that map that was the goal of the recent initiative to redraw California's congressional map. Because of the Purcell Doctrine, those lawsuits will not be able to force changes before the 2026 election, but they will need to be filed soon in order to be litigated on in time for the 2028 election. Democratic redistricting strategists have said they expect states controlled by their party, including New York, Colorado, and Washington state, to attempt to mount counteroffensives in the coming years to draw maps that swing more U.S. House seats to Democrats. One Republican involved in redistricting efforts predicted Wednesday that 70 seats could be redrawn by the end of the 2028 election. CNN's Sarah Ferris contributed to this report, and it was written by Tierney Sneed and Frederica Schouten on April 30th by CNN.